On their honeymoon, billionaire bride discovered he was already married. They said it was the perfect honeymoon. Private island, ocean breeze,
Ready for some
five-star
fun?
villa, a marriage that looked like a fairy tale written for billionaires. She had just become the wife of one of the most powerful men in the country, a man every news outlet called untouchable. But on the third night, everything changed. It started with a phone that wouldn't stop ringing. One call, then another, then a message that lit up the screen while he was in the shower. She wasn't trying to invade his privacy, not at first, but the name on the screen froze her blood. Wife. At first, she thought it was a mistake, a business contact, a saved number, anything but what her mind was starting to suggest. Until the second message arrived. Are you still with him? He's supposed to be here with us. Her hands went cold. Her wedding ring suddenly felt heavier than it ever had. And just as she turned toward the bathroom to confront him, she heard his voice. Not the voice of a honeymooning husband, but the voice of a man lying to someone else about her. Before we get into this story, I want to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and let me know if you're watching from the United States, Canada, or the United Kingdom. We read every single comment, and we'd love to hear from you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button because what you're about to hear will shake everything you think you know about love, trust, and the dangerous secrets that the ultra-wealthy keep hidden behind closed doors. Now let's get into this. Her name was Cassidy Lane, and before she ever became Mrs. Cassidy Hargrove, she was just a woman from a small town in rural Tennessee who had worked harder than most people twice her age to build something real in the world. Cassidy grew up in a 3-bedroom house outside of Knoxville with her mother, her grandmother, and a determined quiet that people from small towns either run from or carry with them forever. She carried hers. It made her focused. It made her careful. It made her the kind of woman who took nothing at face value and trusted almost no one completely. She was 31 years old when she moved to New York City to take a position as a senior financial analyst at a mid-sized investment firm on the 42nd floor of a glass building in Midtown Manhattan. She was not the flashiest person in the room. She was rarely the loudest, but she was always the sharpest. Her colleagues noticed it. Her supervisors noticed it. And eventually, at a private charity gala on a cold November evening in the third year of her time in New York, a man named Cole Hargrove noticed it too. Cole Hargrove was 38 years old, and his name was the kind that opened doors before you even knocked. His grandfather had built Hargrove Industries from a single construction company in Ohio, and his father had turned it into a national empire spanning real estate, private equity, defense contracting, and technology infrastructure. By the time Cole took over as CEO at 34, the company was valued at close to $9 billion. He was on the covers of magazines. He was photographed at fundraisers with senators. He owned 3 homes, a private plane, and a yacht that had been featured in an Architectural Digest spread. And on that cold November night, standing near the dessert table at the charity gala with a glass of sparkling water in his hand, because he didn't drink, Cole Hargrove looked across the room and saw Cassidy Lane arguing quietly but firmly with a senior partner who had gotten the numbers wrong on a nonprofit endowment fund. She wasn't rude. She wasn't theatrical. She was just correct, and she knew she was correct, and she didn't need anyone's permission to say so. Cole walked over. He introduced himself. She already knew his name, of course. Everyone in that room knew his name. But she shook his hand like he was simply a person, and something about that apparently undid him completely. He asked for her number. She gave it to him. He called the next morning. They had dinner 2 weeks later at a quiet Italian restaurant in the West Village that he'd had privately reserved just for them, and Cassidy would later tell her best friend and roommate, a woman named Brooke Patterson, that she hadn't expected to like him. She'd expected him to be polished and hollow the way very rich men sometimes were. A beautiful surface over an empty room. But he wasn't like that. Or at least, he didn't seem like that. He was thoughtful. He asked her questions and then actually listened to the answers. He talked about his grandmother with genuine tenderness. He admitted that the pressure of his father's legacy sometimes felt like wearing a coat that didn't quite fit. He made her laugh twice, and both times it surprised her. She drove home at 11 o'clock and sat in her car for a few minutes before going upstairs. Brooke was waiting on the couch with tea. Well, she asked. Cassidy was quiet for a moment. He might be real, she said. And that was about the highest compliment Cassidy Lane had ever given anyone. Over the next 14 months, Cole Hargrove pursued Cassidy with a patience and consistency that she had simply never encountered before. He didn't overwhelm her. He didn't try to dazzle her into submission the way wealthy men sometimes did, flying women to Paris on the third date, and then disappearing when the novelty wore off. He showed up. He called when he said he would call. He remembered small things. The name of her grandmother. The coffee she liked. The fact that she hated cut flowers but loved potted plants because at least those ones had a chance. He sent her a small potted succulent on the 6-month mark of their first date. She kept it on her windowsill for years. There were things about Cole that gave Cassidy pause during those 14 months. Small things. The way he occasionally went quiet in a conversation and seemed to be elsewhere, somewhere she couldn't reach. The fact that his phone was always face down on tables. The way certain calls made him stand up and leave the room without explanation, sometimes for 20 or 30 minutes, and come back looking composed in a way that felt deliberate. She noticed all of it. She filed it away. She told herself that powerful men had complicated lives, and complications did not automatically mean deception. She told herself that. He proposed on a Tuesday evening in February, 14 months after the gala, on the rooftop of the building where they'd had their first dinner. He'd had the restaurant catered up there with a small table and candles, and that exact first meal recreated dish by dish. He went down on one knee. The ring was 4 carats, emerald cut, a pale champagne diamond that looked like frozen light. Cassidy cried. She said yes. Brooke screamed so loud when she told her that the neighbors knocked on the wall. The wedding was planned for 8 months later. It was held at a restored estate in the Hudson Valley with 300 guests, a 12-piece orchestra, and a floral installation that cost more than Cassidy's parents' house. Her grandmother flew in from Knoxville and cried the entire ceremony. Her mother wore pale blue and kept touching Cassidy's face like she was trying to memorize it. Cole stood at the altar and watched Cassidy walk toward him, and the expression on his face was something that everyone at that wedding would later describe in exactly the same way. He looked like a man who had gotten away with something. At the time, everyone thought that meant he felt lucky. Later, people would wonder if it meant something else entirely. The honeymoon was Cole's idea entirely. He planned it himself, which surprised Cassidy because Cole usually had assistants handle every logistical detail of his life. But this, he said, he wanted to do himself. He wanted it to be perfect. He wanted her to know that he had thought about every single thing. He booked a private island in the Maldives. Not a resort. An actual private island. One that could be rented exclusively for 2 weeks at a cost that Cassidy didn't ask about and Cole didn't offer. A 5-bedroom villa sat at the edge of the water with a glass-bottomed floor in the living room that let you watch the ocean passing beneath your feet. There was a private chef, a boat, a snorkeling reef 50 yards off the dock, and a stretch of white sand beach that was, for 14 days, entirely theirs. They arrived on a Friday evening in October. The first 2 days were everything they were supposed to be. They swam in the early morning when the water was still cool and the light was turning gold over the horizon. They ate dinner outside every night with the ocean so close they could hear it between sentences. They stayed up late talking the way they used to in those first months of dating, unhurried and honest. Cole seemed relaxed in a way Cassidy had rarely seen. The tightness he sometimes carried in his shoulders was gone. He laughed more. He held her hand constantly. He kept looking at her like she was something he still couldn't quite believe was real. And Cassidy felt something loosen inside her chest that she hadn't even realized was held tight. She thought, on the second night, lying in the dark with the sound of the ocean filling the room, that this was what she had been waiting for without knowing she was waiting. Not the island. Not the villa. This specific feeling. Like she was finally somewhere she was allowed to stay. She fell asleep before he did. She did not know that 2 time zones away, a woman named Laura Hargrove was sitting in a kitchen in Columbus, Ohio, watching the clock. The third night started quietly. They had spent the afternoon on the boat, anchored over the reef, watching sea turtles move through the water below them with that slow, ancient grace that made you feel like the world had been going on without you for a very long time and was perfectly fine about it. Cassidy had taken photographs. Cole had fallen asleep on the deck with his arm over his eyes, and she had watched him sleeping and thought that even the private, complicated parts of him that she didn't fully understand were parts she was prepared to spend a lifetime learning. They came back to the villa as the sun was going down, skin warm and salt-dried, carrying the particular quiet exhaustion of a day spent doing almost nothing and somehow feeling completely full. Cole showered first while Cassidy sat on the outdoor deck with a glass of wine and watched the sky turn pink and then deep orange and then a purple so dark it was nearly black. By the time she came inside, he was out of the bathroom and on the phone, standing with his back to the room, speaking in a low voice near the far window. She didn't think anything of it. She had stopped thinking anything of it, really. Cole was always managing something at the edges of their life together. Some deal, some crisis, some piece of the empire that needed tending to even when he was supposed to be away. She went to the bathroom, showered, and was wrapping herself in a towel when she heard the silence. The phone call had ended. The villa was quiet except for the ocean. She came out of the bathroom and Cole was gone. Not far, she could see him through the glass doors on the lower deck, standing in the dark near the water with his phone pressed to his ear again, nodding slowly. His phone was on the nightstand. She walked past it. She was going to the kitchen to get water. She was passing the nightstand. She wasn't looking for anything, but the screen lit up on its own as she walked by, and the name at the top of the notification stopped her feet as effectively as a wall. Wife. The word was there. Just that word, as a contact name. No first name. No last name. Not a nickname she might have been able to explain away. Wife. She stood very still. Her mind moved quickly through the possibilities the way it always did, analytical and careful, looking for the reasonable explanation first. A business contact with a strange saved name. A joke between colleagues. A contact migrated from an old phone that he'd never cleaned up. A sister with a dark sense of humor. Anything. Then the second notification appeared beneath the first. Are you still with him? He's supposed to be here with us. Her hand went to her mouth. The wine glass she'd been carrying tipped slightly in her other hand, and she caught it just before it spilled, set it down on the nightstand with extreme care, as if sudden movements might make this real in a way it wasn't yet. She read the message again. Are you still with him? He's supposed to be here with us. Him. Not you. Him. The contact labeled wife was not talking to Cole as a husband. The contact labeled wife was talking about Cole as a subject, as a third party, as a man who was supposed to be somewhere else. The room tilted, and then from outside, through the glass door, she heard Cole's voice change register. She had heard Cole speak in many modes over the past 2 years. The professional mode, crisp and measured. The tender mode, quiet and careful. The playful mode, loose and warm. She had cataloged all of them the way careful people catalog the people they love, looking for the full picture. She had never heard this mode before. It was low and apologetic and intimate in a way that had nothing to do with business. It was the voice of someone managing a person who had a claim on them, someone trying to soothe the hurt that they themselves had caused. She couldn't make out every word through the glass, but she heard 2 sentences clearly. She doesn't know anything. She won't. The cold that moved through Cassidy's body in that moment started at the base of her skull and moved slowly downward, the way cold water fills a glass. She stood completely still for what felt like a very long time, but was probably 15 seconds. Then she put the wine glass down, walked to the bed, sat on the edge of it, and began to think. This is the part that people who later told Cassidy's story often got wrong. They assumed she panicked. They assumed she cried, or screamed, or immediately confronted him on the deck with the ocean behind her like a scene from a movie. That was not who Cassidy Lane was. Cassidy Lane had grown up in a household where resources were limited and mistakes were expensive, where you measured twice before you cut anything, because you only had so much material to work with. She had built her entire career on the ability to sit with uncomfortable data and process it accurately before drawing conclusions. She sat on the edge of that bed and she thought. The contact name was wife, not Sarah or Jennifer labeled as wife, just wife as a full complete contact name, which suggested it had been entered that way deliberately, permanently, as a category rather than a person. The message said he was supposed to be here with us. The word us, plural, which meant at minimum 2 people were expecting Cole somewhere he was not. The voice outside had said she doesn't know anything. She won't. She was Cassidy. The she who doesn't know was Cassidy, which meant Cole had told whoever was on the other end of that phone call that his own new wife was unaware of something. Something big enough to warrant that specific sentence. Something that whoever called herself wife was presumably fully aware of. The chain of logic assembled itself in Cassidy's mind with a terrible, clean efficiency. She heard the glass door open. Cole came back inside. He looked the way he always looked after a work call. composed, a little distracted, already shifting back into the mode of a man on a private island honeymoon. "Hey," he said. "Sorry about that. Just a situation with the Singapore deal. Nothing major." "Okay," Cassidy said. Her voice was perfectly even. Cole looked at her for a moment, the way people sometimes do when something is slightly off, but they can't identify what. Then he smiled, kissed the top of her head, and went to the kitchen for water. Cassidy waited until she heard the refrigerator open. Then she picked up his phone from the nightstand, and she started from the beginning. What she found in the next 4 minutes changed the architecture of everything she thought she knew. The contact labeled wife had a full name in the details field. Laura Hargrove, the same last name, Cole's last name. There were 847 text messages in the thread. She didn't have time to read them all. She skimmed. She read enough. Laura Hargrove had been married to Cole Hargrove for 6 years. They had 2 children, a boy named Thomas who was 4 years old and a girl named Rachel who was 2. Laura believed Cole was on a business trip in Singapore. Laura had been believing Cole was on a series of business trips for the past 14 months, which was the exact length of time Cole had been dating Cassidy. She read one message from 8 months ago in which Cole told Laura he missed her. He told her he was working on a deal that would change everything for their family. He told her to kiss the kids for him. He told her he'd be home by Friday. He had been in Cassidy's apartment that Friday. She had made him dinner. He had stayed the weekend. She put the phone down. She heard the refrigerator close. She had approximately 10 seconds. She made a decision. She put the phone back exactly where it was, face down on the nightstand, screen toward the mattress. She arranged herself on the bed against the pillows. She picked up the book she had been reading, opened it to the page she was on, and held it at reading angle. Cole came back into the room with 2 glasses of water. He set one on her side of the nightstand without being asked because he had always been good at small gestures. That was part of how he'd done it. "Tired?" he asked. "A little," she said. She turned a page she hadn't read. "Good tired, though." "Good tired is the best kind," he said, and climbed into bed beside her. He was asleep within 20 minutes. Cassidy lay in the dark beside her husband, listening to the ocean, and she did not sleep at all. By 4 in the morning, she had a plan. It was not the plan of a woman acting from emotion. It was the plan of a woman who had spent 12 years in financial analysis and understood that the most dangerous thing you could do in a crisis was move before you had full information. She needed to know everything before she moved, because once she moved, there would be no taking it back. And whatever she did, she needed to do it in a way that protected her, not just emotionally, legally, financially, completely. She needed her own lawyer. She needed documentation. She needed to understand exactly what kind of marriage she had just entered, what its legal standing was, and what her rights were in every possible scenario. And she needed to get off this island. She thought about Laura Hargrove in Columbus, Ohio, putting 2 small children to bed alone for the 3rd night in a row while her husband lay 4,000 miles away in a private villa next to another woman he had married in secret. She thought about Thomas, who was 4, and Rachel, who was 2, and what the world would look like to them when it all came apart. She thought about her grandmother at the wedding, touching her face like she was trying to memorize it. She lay in the dark and breathed and did not cry, not because she didn't want to, but because the tears could wait. The work couldn't. At 5 in the morning, while Cole was still deeply asleep, she slipped out of bed, took her personal phone to the far bathroom, closed the door, and called Brooke Patterson in New York. It was 10 p.m. in New York. Brooke picked up on the second ring. Cassidy told her everything in a flat, quiet voice that Brooke would later say was the most frightening version of her best friend she had ever heard. Brooke was quiet for a long time after. Then she said, "Tell me what you need." Cassidy told her. By 7 a.m. Eastern Time, Brooke had located a family law attorney in New York who had previously handled several high-net-worth cases involving concealed marital status. By 8 a.m., she had forwarded Cassidy a secure email chain with a direct line to the attorney's private cell number. By 8:30 a.m., Cassidy was back in bed beside Cole, her phone returned to her purse, her face arranged in the expression of a sleeping woman. When he woke up at 9 and kissed her shoulder and suggested breakfast on the deck, she smiled and said that sounded wonderful. She ate eggs and fruit and drank coffee and watched the ocean and let Cole tell her about a book he was reading, and her face showed nothing. Nothing at all. Here is what Brooke Patterson found in the next 48 hours while Cassidy stayed on that island and played the role of happy new bride. Cole Hargrove had married Laura and Weston, a woman from Columbus, Ohio, in a private ceremony 6 years earlier. The marriage certificate was public record in Franklin County, Ohio. The marriage had never been dissolved. There were no divorce filings in any county in Ohio, New York, or any other state that Brooke could find. There was no legal separation on record anywhere. Cole Hargrove had married Cassidy Lane 8 days ago in a ceremony witnessed by 300 people, with legal documents signed and filed in New York State. His marriage to Cassidy was therefore not a valid legal marriage. Not because they hadn't signed documents, but because one of the signatories had falsified information on the marriage license by omitting an existing legal marriage, which in the state of New York constituted criminal bigamy. The attorney confirmed this. Cassidy received this information on the afternoon of day 4, while Cole was napping on the boat in the cove below. She sat on the deck with a glass of iced tea that she didn't drink, and she read the attorney's message 3 times. Criminal bigamy. Cole Hargrove, whose name opened every door in New York City, whose family was enshrined in the history of American industry, whose photograph she had seen in Forbes magazine at the age of 26 and thought, vaguely, he looks like someone who has never had a real problem, had committed a federal crime. Against her, against Laura, against their children, against all of them. She thought about the voice through the glass door. She doesn't know anything. She won't. She put the iced tea down. She made a phone call. She called Laura Hargrove directly. This was the part that, later, when the story became what it became, was described by almost every journalist who covered it as the bravest thing Cassidy Lane ever did. She would argue it wasn't bravery. She would say it was just the most logical move. Laura Hargrove was a victim in this the same as she was, and sitting on opposite ends of a secret that only benefited Cole Hargrove was not a situation Cassidy was willing to remain in. She got Laura's number from the messages she had memorized from Cole's phone on that first night. She added it to her own contacts. She stepped off the villa property onto the beach where she could see in both directions and know if anyone was coming. And she called. Laura picked up on the third ring. She sounded the way a person sounds when they've been managing low-level anxiety for a very long time and have gotten good at sounding fine. Controlled. Pleasant. A little tired underneath. Hello. Laura, Cassidy said. My name is Cassidy Lane. I need to tell you something about your husband. The silence that followed was about 5 seconds long. Then Laura said, very quietly, What did you say your name was? Cassidy Lane. I was Cole's. I am Cole's. She stopped, sorted the sentence. I thought I was Cole's wife. We got married 8 days ago. The silence this time was longer. Then Laura's voice, still quiet, said, I'm going to need you to say that again. Cassidy said it again. She heard Laura's breathing change. Then she heard Laura say, in the most controlled, devastated voice Cassidy had ever heard, He told me he was in Singapore. He is in the Maldives, Cassidy said. With me. Another silence. Then Laura started to cry. It was not dramatic crying. It was the kind of crying that sounds like something fundamental giving way in a quiet room. Low and private and real. Cassidy stood on the beach with her feet in the warm sand and listened and felt the full weight of what Cole Hargrove had done settle over both of them like weather. After a while, Laura stopped. She took a long breath. How did you find out? Cassidy told her about the phone, the contact name, the messages. Laura was quiet again. Then she said, He put my name in as wife. Yes. That's almost worse, Laura said. That he just filed me under wife like I was a category. Cassidy didn't say anything because there was nothing to say. I have 2 children, Laura said. I know. Thomas and Rachel. Another silence, different this time. You read the messages. Some of them. I'm sorry. Don't be. Laura's voice had something in it now. Something that had moved past grief into a harder, colder register. He told me he was in Singapore on a deal. I was going to take the kids to my mother's this weekend. He was supposed to be back Monday. A pause. He told me he loved me last week. I know. He was already married to you. Technically, Cassidy said, neither of our marriages is real right now. He committed bigamy. My attorney says it voids the marriage and triggers criminal exposure. Another silence. You already have an attorney. I got one 2 days ago. Laura said nothing for a moment. Then, softly, something that sounded like a very dark laugh. I have a feeling I need to call one too. I have a referral for you if you want it, Cassidy said. Different firm. No conflict. There was a pause. You already thought of that. I had a long night. Laura was quiet. Then she said, Cassidy. Yes. What are you going to do? I'm going to go back into that villa, Cassidy said. And I am going to give Cole Hargrove absolutely no indication that anything is wrong for the next 72 hours, while both of our lawyers build the most complete legal strategy possible. And then, Cassidy said, we are going to do this on our terms. Not his. There was a pause. Then Laura Hargrove said something that Cassidy would remember for the rest of her life. I'm glad you called me. I'm glad it was you. Cassidy stood on that beach for another minute after they hung up, looking out at the water, which was the exact color of something valuable and very far away. Then she put her phone in her pocket and walked back up to the villa. Cole was just waking up from his nap on the boat. He looked up and smiled at her. Still the same smile. Still that same expression. Hey, he said. Come watch the sunset with me. Of course, she said. And she sat beside him and watched the sun go down and didn't feel anything at all. She had already moved everything she felt into a room inside herself that had no windows. 72 hours. For 72 hours, Cassidy Lane gave the performance of her life. She held his hand on walks along the beach. She laughed at the right moments. She let him hold her at night and stared at the ceiling in the dark and focused on the sound of her own breathing, slow and even, because the body needs instructions when the mind is in war. She ate every meal with him. She swam in the reef with him and watched the sea turtles again and let him point out the ones he'd learned the names of from the guide. She read beside him on the deck in the afternoons. She let him photograph her against the sunset backdrop because he liked taking pictures of her. He always had. And now she understood that this too had been part of a performance, that they had both been performing and only one of them knew it. On the fifth night, Cole's phone rang again. He took it outside. She waited, watched, listened. She caught only fragments, but she cataloged them. There was someone other than Laura involved. Someone she didn't yet have a name for. A voice on the other end that she could occasionally hear through the glass as high and anxious, not Laura's measured control, but something more frantic. She noted it. She sent a message to her attorney. On the sixth morning, Cole seemed distracted, edgy in a way she had never seen on this trip. He kept checking his phone. He smiled less. At breakfast, he was somewhere else entirely, and when she asked what he was thinking about, he said the Singapore deal and kissed her forehead, and she smiled and said she hoped it worked out. He had no idea. That was perhaps the strangest part of those 72 hours. Not the fear, not the grief, not the cold, focused rage that she was managing carefully the way you manage a fire in a controlled environment. The strangest part was how easy it was for him to not see her. How thoroughly she had become backdrop to his actual life. She was the story he had told the public, the beautiful new wife on a private island honeymoon. Laura was the real story, the woman in Columbus with his children and his legal name. And there was apparently a third story she didn't know yet. She found out what it was on the morning of day 7. She found out because Cole made a mistake. Up until that point, he had been meticulous. The phone was always with him or face down. The calls went outside. The messages were deleted quickly. He was practiced, and Cassidy understood now that he had been practicing for a long time. But on the morning of day 7, Cole left his phone on the kitchen counter when he went to get towels from the linen closet for the beach. He was gone about 45 seconds. 45 seconds was enough. Cassidy crossed the kitchen in 3 steps. She did not hesitate. She had been waiting for this. She found the message thread she hadn't been able to access before, the one from the anxious high voice she'd heard through the glass. The contact was saved under a woman's first name. Renata. She read fast. Renata was not a business contact. Renata was a woman in New York City whom Cole had been seeing for the past 7 months. Renata did not know about Laura. Renata did not know about Cassidy. Renata believed she was Cole's serious girlfriend and that he had been about to end a long-distance relationship to commit fully to her. The long-distance relationship was apparently Cassidy. Cole had told Renata that he had made a mistake with Cassidy, that it had moved too fast, and that once he sorted some business complications he would come back to New York and they would figure out their future together. He had told Renata this the week before the wedding. 3 women. Cassidy put the phone down, returned to the couch, and picked up her book just as Cole came back with the towels over his arm. Ready for the beach? He asked. She looked up from the page. Absolutely, she said. 3 women. A wife in Columbus with 2 children he was lying to about Singapore. A woman in New York he had been lying to about moving on. And Cassidy, who he had married in what he apparently believed was a perfect sealed container. A fairy tale running parallel to his real life. A story that would never intersect with the others because he was that careful. He was that good. He had never been caught, and he believed he never would be. She smiled at him and took a towel and walked out to the beach. She called Brooke that night. She told her about Renata. Brooke was quiet for a very long moment. Cass, she said. I know. 3. I know, Brooke. What are you going to do? Cassidy looked out at the ocean from the deck, dark and silver in the moonlight, the sound of it constant and indifferent and old. I'm going to end this in a way that means he can never do it again to anyone, she said. Not to me, not to Laura, not to Renata, not to whoever comes next. She paused. And I need you to find out what's in that prenuptial agreement. Here was the thing about the prenuptial agreement. Cole had insisted on it. Cassidy had expected it, of course, because you didn't marry a $9 billion company heir without a prenuptial agreement, and she hadn't been offended. She had had her own attorney review it before she signed. It had seemed standard for a marriage at that financial level. Protection for the Hargrove estate, limitations on claims in the event of divorce, standard clauses about infidelity. But Cassidy's attorney had been a generalist, a smart, careful woman, but not a specialist in high-stakes financial arrangements. And now, with Brooke's help, Cassidy's new attorney, who had made her career specifically in cases involving deception and concealed assets in high-net-worth marriages, was reading every line of that document with a very different set of questions. What they found was not immediately visible. It was buried in subsection 8, paragraph 3, in language so dense and technical that it read at first like standard boilerplate. But it wasn't standard. The clause stated that in the event of divorce initiated by Cassidy for any reason other than documented evidence of fraud committed by Cole at the time of the marriage filing, Cassidy would be entitled to a settlement capped at $2 million and would be required to sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement about all aspects of their marriage and Cole's personal and professional conduct. $2 million. In a $9 billion estate. It was not an accident. It was architecture. The clause had been written specifically to contain any woman Cole married, to pay her enough to seem like a settlement while ensuring she could never speak publicly about anything she had experienced, and to cap her exposure at a number that was, relative to his net worth, essentially nothing. But there was a gap in the architecture. The exception clause. Documented evidence of fraud committed by Cole at the time of the marriage filing. Cole had committed fraud at the time of the marriage filing. He had withheld his existing marriage to Laura Hargrove on the license application. That was not a gray area. That was a fact. That was documented in public county records in Ohio, verifiable in an afternoon. Which meant the non-disclosure clause didn't apply. Which meant the settlement cap didn't apply. Which meant the entire prenuptial agreement collapsed. Because a contract predicated on fraud by one party is not a valid contract. Cassidy's attorney laid all of this out in a memo that Cassidy read on her phone on day 8 of the honeymoon, sitting in the villa bathroom with the shower running to cover any sound, while Cole slept in the bedroom 20 feet away. She read it twice. Then she sent one message back. File everything. Monday, Sunday, the last full day on the island. Cole was in a better mood than he'd been in several days. Whatever had been making him edgy had apparently resolved. He was warm again. Present. He reached for her hand constantly the way he had in those early months. He suggested they take the boat out one more time, anchor over the reef, spend the afternoon in the water. She said yes. They spent 3 hours in the ocean that afternoon, floating in the warm, clear water above the reef, watching the fish move in their slow, deliberate patterns below. Cole pointed out a spotted eagle ray that glided beneath them like something from another world entirely. He was excited about it in a genuine, boyish way that Cassidy had always found endearing. She watched him from behind her snorkel mask. She thought about who he was. Not the monster version, because she had never believed in clean categories. Not the victim version, because he had made these choices with full awareness and had continued making them for years. Just the actual person. A man who was capable of extraordinary tenderness and extraordinary cruelty and seemed to experience no contradiction between them. A man who had looked at 3 women and decided that their lives, their choices, their fundamental right to accurate information about their own situation were simply less important than his own desire to have all of the things he wanted simultaneously. She thought about Thomas and Rachel. She thought about Laura's voice on the phone. I'm glad it was you. She thought about her grandmother at the wedding, touching her face. She swam back to the boat. Monday morning. They were scheduled to take the boat to the main island at noon for their flight back to New York. Cole was showering. Their bags were mostly packed. The villa had that specific, slightly hollow feeling of a place that was already becoming a memory. Cassidy was sitting at the kitchen table with her coffee when her phone vibrated. A message from her attorney. 3 words. Everything is filed. She put the phone face down on the table. She heard the shower turn off. A few minutes later, Cole came out in a white linen shirt, hair still damp, looking the way he always looked in the mornings, like someone with nothing to hide. Ready for our last breakfast? He said. I'm ready, she said. He made coffee. He poured her a second cup without being asked. He talked about being back in New York, about the dinners they should have, the apartment adjustments they'd been planning, the life they were about to begin as a married couple. She listened. She drank her coffee. She watched him the way she had watched the sea turtles, with genuine attention, without judgment, knowing that something was about to change that would not change back. They ate breakfast. They packed the last few things. And as Cole was carrying the bags toward the door, Cassidy said, Cole. Something in her voice. Just the 2 syllables of his name. But there must have been something in them that he felt, because he turned around and looked at her differently than he had all week. Yeah, he said. She held his gaze. I spoke to Laura on Thursday, she said. The stillness that came over Cole Hargrove in that moment was the kind of stillness that isn't calm. It was the stillness of a man watching everything he has built approach the edge of a cliff in slow motion, unable to do anything at all. What? He said. Not a question, just the word. I also know about Renata, she said. He set the bags down. Cassidy. My attorney filed a bigamy complaint with the New York District Attorney's Office this morning, she said. There's also a civil action being filed against you and Hargrove Industries for fraud in connection with the prenuptial agreement. Laura's attorney filed simultaneous actions in Franklin County, Ohio, and Renata's family has been contacted. Cole's face did something complicated. You need to listen to me, he said. I can explain. I know everything, Cole. She said it quietly. No anger. No drama. Just the clean, flat certainty of a woman who had done her research. I know about Laura. I know about the kids. I know about Renata. I know about subsection 8, paragraph 3. I know about the Ohio marriage certificate. I know all of it. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He sat down on the couch. And Cassidy Lane stood in the kitchen of the most beautiful villa she had ever been in, on the last morning of the honeymoon that had never really been a honeymoon, and she felt something leave her body. Not grief. Not anger. Something heavier than both of those. The weight of caring about what he had to say. I don't need an explanation, she said. I don't need you to tell me why. I've thought about it enough to understand why people do things like this. I don't need to hear it from you. She picked up her bag. What I need you to understand is that it's done. And the way it ends from here is not up to you. She walked to the door. Cole said her name. Once. The way people say a name when it's the last card they have. She turned around and looked at him one more time. Just a person. Just a man who had made a series of choices and was now standing in the consequences of them. In a beautiful villa on a private island, with the ocean outside and everything collapsing inside. Laura's a good woman, Cassidy said. So is Renata, I think. Be careful with them. Whatever you're about to do next, be careful with them. Then she walked out of the villa and down to the dock and waited for the boat in the morning sun. Cole didn't follow her. The water was very blue. The boat came. She left. What happened next happened fast, the way things do when they've been building for a long time and then suddenly have nowhere left to build. The bigamy complaint, once filed, became a matter of public record within 72 hours. The New York DA's office issued a statement confirming an active investigation. By the time Cole Hargrove's plane landed at JFK, there were cameras at the gate. The story broke that night on 3 separate news outlets simultaneously. Hargrove Industries lost 11% of its stock value in the first hour of trading the following morning. The board of directors issued a statement expressing their confidence in the company while simultaneously calling an emergency meeting, which is the corporate equivalent of saying everything is fine while running. Cole's father, Gerald Hargrove, 71 years old and retired to a home in Scottsdale, gave exactly one public statement in which he described his son's behavior as deeply troubling and said the family stood behind the legal process, which was his way of standing behind no one while appearing to stand behind everyone. Cole's attorney released a statement denying any criminal intent and citing complex personal circumstances, which is lawyer language for my client did the thing, but we're going to argue about what the thing means. Laura Hargrove gave no public statement. She went to her mother's house in Cincinnati with Thomas and Rachel, and she did not speak to reporters. Renata, when contacted by journalists, said only that she had been misled and was focusing on her well-being, and then she went offline entirely. And Cassidy Lane flew back to New York, went to Brooke Patterson's apartment, and slept for 15 hours straight. When she woke up, there were 437 missed calls and messages on her phone. She made coffee. She sat with Brooke at the kitchen table, the same table where Brooke had waited up with tea on the night of that first date. And they drank their coffee, and Cassidy told her all of it, the whole thing, the beach and the contact name, and the phone calls and Laura and Renata, and breakfast on the last morning, and the look on Cole's face when she said, "I know everything." Brooke listened to the whole story without speaking. When it was done, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You never cried." "Not yet. You're going to." "I know." When Cassidy looked out the window at the New York street below, the ordinary Monday morning traffic, the bodega across the street with its plastic fruit out front, the man walking his dog who stopped to look at his phone, the woman in a yellow coat who was late for something. "Soon," she said, "when I have time." And then, because Brooke knew her and knew what she needed, Brooke reached across the table and put her hand over Cassidy's and didn't say anything else. The legal proceedings took 18 months. Cole Hargrove was formally charged with bigamy in the state of New York in the 4th month. The charge carried a potential sentence of up to 4 years. His attorneys negotiated extensively. He ultimately pled guilty to a reduced charge, paid a substantial fine, and was sentenced to 300 hours of community service and 2 years of supervised probation. He did not go to prison. This was the outcome that generated the most public outrage, and it was an outcome Cassidy had anticipated and told her attorney she could live with, because the criminal case had never been her primary focus. The civil case was her primary focus. With the prenuptial agreement invalidated on the grounds of fraud, and with Cassidy's legal team having built an 18-month record of Cole's deception, including financial transfers, false statements, and the full extent of assets concealed during the relationship, the civil settlement reached in month 16 was significant enough that the amount was never publicly disclosed. What was disclosed, because Cassidy specifically requested that no non-disclosure agreement be required as a condition of the settlement, was that it had been reached that Cassidy Lane had not been required to sign any confidentiality provisions, and that she was free to speak about her experience. She gave one interview. It was a long-form piece in a national publication, not a television appearance, not a podcast, not a viral tearful moment. A written interview, carefully considered, with answers that she had taken 3 weeks to draft. She talked about Cole carefully, not viciously, not charitably. She spoke about what had happened with the same flat precision she brought to everything. She said that the most dangerous thing about a person capable of long-term sophisticated deception was not their malice but their competence, that Cole had not been a cartoon villain, that he had been genuinely warm and capable of genuine connection, and that this was exactly what made what he had done so damaging. Because you couldn't simply say he was never real. Some of it had been real, and you had to hold both of those things in your hands at once, which was an uncomfortable weight that didn't go away quickly. She talked about Laura with care and respect. She said that their phone call on that beach had been one of the hardest conversations of her life, and also one that had clarified something fundamental for her about what it meant to be a woman in the world, which was that the women in any given man's life almost always had more in common with each other than they had with him. She said she didn't think Cole had ever fully understood any of the women in his life. She thought he had understood the version of each of them that was useful to him. And that was different from understanding a person. That was just inventory management. When asked about the ring, the 4-carat champagne diamond, she said she had returned it. Not to Cole. To a jeweler, who had sold it and used the proceeds to fund a legal aid organization in New York that provided free family law services to women who couldn't afford attorneys. When asked how she was doing, she said that she had gotten a new potted plant to replace the succulent, which had died while she was on the honeymoon, and that she had found some comfort in the fact that even small things deserved the chance to grow, and that she intended to be better at keeping the new one alive. The interview was shared widely. The final lines were the ones that stayed with people. The interviewer had asked her what she would say to Cole if she could say anything at all without consequence. She had thought about this question for almost a full minute before answering. Then she said, "I would tell him that the most painful part wasn't the betrayal. The most painful part was learning that someone you trusted completely had decided, long before you knew, that your reality was less important than his convenience. And I'd want him to sit with that. Not the consequences, not the legal exposure, not the money, not the press. Just that. The fact that he looked at 3 women who had done nothing but trust him and decided that what they needed to know about their own lives was something he got to control. I'd want him to understand what that means. I don't know if he can, but I'd want him to try." Here is where the story ends. Or at least, where this version of it ends. Laura Hargrove divorced Cole in month 7 of the proceedings. She moved with Thomas and Rachel to Cincinnati, near her mother. She went back to work as a nurse practitioner, which she had been before marrying Cole and stepping back from her career to raise their children. She did not give interviews. She was, by all accounts, doing the slow, difficult work of rebuilding something honest. Renata left New York for several months and came back quieter and seemingly more resolved than before. She declined all interview requests. A mutual friend of hers was quoted once saying that she had described the experience as clarifying, which seemed like a hard-won way of framing something that must have been devastating. Cole Hargrove resigned as CEO of Hargrove Industries in month 9. The board had been patient up to a point. The point turned out to be month 9. He retained his shares and his personal fortune, which meant that the consequences of his actions were significant by most standards and trivial by the standard of what he had done. He is not remarried. Cassidy Lane left her firm and started a small financial consulting practice of her own. She works with nonprofit organizations. She runs it with 3 people she trusts completely. She is not, by any definition, small anymore, though she has always carried that small-town Tennessee quiet with her wherever she goes. She adopted a dog. The potted plant is doing well. And sometimes, very occasionally, on the kinds of nights when the city is quiet enough to hear your own thoughts clearly, she thinks about that beach. The white sand and the warm water, and the moment when she read that contact name and the world split down the middle. She thinks about standing there with her feet in the sand, calling a woman she had never met, who was living a life she hadn't known existed, and saying the 6 most important words she has ever said to anyone. "I need to tell you something." And she thinks about how the hardest thing in the world is not the betrayal itself, not the lies, not the discovery, not even the long months of legal proceedings and public exposure, and the slow, humiliating work of having your most private choices become other people's news. The hardest thing is the question you keep asking yourself afterward, in the dark, in the quiet, in the small, unguarded moments before sleep. Not how did I not know, but what do you do with the parts that were real? She doesn't have a clean answer to that. She suspects she never will. She has decided that not having a clean answer is not the same as being lost. And she keeps the potted plant on the windowsill, where the light is good, and she tends to it every morning, and it grows. Here is what I want to ask you, and I want you to really think about this before you answer in the comments. Cassidy found out on day 3 and spent 4 more days on that island, sleeping beside a man she now knew had betrayed 3 women, managing her grief like a professional and dismantling his life while he thought everything was fine. Some people hear that and say it shows incredible strength. Other people hear that and ask whether there's something deeply human about the fact that she stayed. Not because she was afraid, not because she didn't know what to do, but because some part of her was still absorbing the loss of something she had believed was real. When you find out that something you built your hope on was constructed on lies, do you think the grief is for the person who betrayed you, or for the version of them you needed them to be? Drop a comment and tell us what you think. We read every single comment. And if you've ever been in a situation where the truth came for you like that, where reality arrived all at once and there was no way to unknow it, tell us your story. You don't have to share everything, but we're listening. If this story meant something to you, please hit that like button and subscribe.